Welcome to the MMHP in the 989. Channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history from the city by the bay. And now, here's your host, Scott Baker.
All right, we're back here at Studio 163 in Eskilsville, Michigan with a very special guest, Craig Maki, in the house tonight. How you doing, Craig?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for making the trip.
Yay, thanks for inviting me.
Hey, that would be Fred over there, your buddy Fred. How you doing, Fred?
I'm doing great.
Sir Fred's an award-winning podcaster now. He, we just got back from the Review Awards this week, and Sir Fred and Dr. J, Mike Beatty, all of us got to take home an award for this podcast. So
congratulations.
We are the first guest that we get to spill our beans on. So
yeah, that's terrific. You guys do a great job. I was listening to them one after the other this week.
Oh, really?
To sort of catch up on what you've been up to.
Was there anything that took your ear?
Yeah, I went to school in Ann Arbor, and the School Kids Records podcast really brought back a lot of memories. A lot of names I hadn't heard in a while, and memories of doing radio myself on public stations. And I got my start over there at CBN in Ann Arbor. And I remember getting School Kids CDs into the station there and playing them.
That's my earliest memories of Fred as well. I was a writer at Delta College, and School Kids Records provided us with every promo of every type of music you could imagine. Yeah. And Fred would be like, "Are you going to run a story? Are you going to run a story?" No, I'm just kidding. No, we had a good time. That's how I got introduced to Fred before he became the big author. So, how you doing, Fred? Everything going good this week?
Yes. Had a birthday yesterday.
Hey, milestone. All right.
Yeah, we're not going to say what number I guess that was.
Well, we got tag team birthday or tag team ages over here. So, yeah. How you doing, Dr. J?
Doing great. Basking in the glory of our award.
Oh, that's so wonderful. What a great weekend we had. We had a guest in here for a brief part one of an interview, and that was wonderful there at the Rock Hall of Fame.
Yep, and a nice night at the Vault.
A beautiful night at the Vault the next night.
What a nice venue that is.
Oh, we're lucky to have such nice stuff around here in the mid-Michigan area.
Certainly.
Where was the award?
It was at
taking place?
The Vault in Saginaw. It's kind of like a I don't know if
auditorium.
Yeah. Well, it's if you ever been to or heard of the Machine Shop in Flint, I guess it's comparable to that. But it's a little even more modern, I guess. So I haven't been to the Machine Shop, but
really impressive lighting, good sound. Yeah, it was a place I will go again.
Yeah. I took a lot of photos of the acts because it made our local scene just look like they're on a national stage with all the lighting and everything, and it gave us a great feel. And every artist, and I quote Mike Brush, our great keyboard player from our area, he says, "I've never been to a Review Awards where the first artist to the last artist made my jaw just hang the whole night." So, and I think he was right on. Everything was so wonderful. It was so different, and everybody was working hard and putting out great performances. So it's good to see in this COVID age, I suppose.
Yeah, that sounds terrific. Yeah. Sorry I missed it.
We got lucky. We pulled in the win for that, and Mike Beatty was in the house. Mike got to share it with us. He's joined us for the second season. He's our vault master himself. He kind of archives with the video footage and
great.
And I thank you, and I'm humbled by being including the fly on the wall.
You're the man.
Awards.
I'll tell you what, if three of us can't dig something up, Mike will bring it in. We fit good together for our age groups. A lot of different eras here. And Craig, thank you for bringing all the history that you've written about. You just put another book out recently?
Yep. Yeah.
Give us a little bit of behind that.
It's called Tomorrow Brings Memories, Detroit's first underground record company. And it's sort of it sort of starts out as a kind of a memoir about the subject of the Universal and Hot Wax and Mellow label records that were issued in Detroit in the early 40s before America got involved with World War II officially. It was just sort of a mystery to me for years and years. Back in the 90s, I was introduced to a number of records that the York Brothers did on these labels, including Hamtramck Mama, which was a huge jukebox hit in the Midwest, let alone Detroit. and I always wondered who the people were behind it. You know, how did it come about? Especially with country music, scoring a country music jukebox hit during the swing era kind of boggled my mind. And when I was working on my first book, the Detroit Country Music book that University of Michigan Press put out in 2013, I knew a little bit about it. I knew one guy's name, and because of some Billboard magazine mentions, but in last couple years, I really figured out who else was involved, and I got that story, and it just made a whole lot of sense to me, the way it played out and how it influenced the business. Actually, probably influenced a lot of independent record companies that appeared after the war ended, including Fortune Records.
How did you find this information that made it work for you, that explained it all?
I tell it in the book in the beginning. There was this record that Jack Brown of Fortune Records put out in '51 called Handyman by the Shawn Brothers. And ever since I knew about that record, going back 25 years, it was a '78. The flip side of it was by a guy named Johnny Bucket, which was also an alias, called Griddle Greasing Daddy. But anyway, these were jukebox records, not meant for radio play, and people would often ask me, "Who are the Shawn Brothers? Do you know any?" Since I was kind of doing interviews for my radio shows and meeting older country musicians in the Detroit area, people would ask me, "Have you heard of the Shawn Brothers?" And so I'd ask the musicians that I met. Nobody had ever heard of them. And which struck me as kind of strange, because the music community in Detroit was so, social. Everybody kind of visited each other at their clubs, and they would sit in and stuff, and everybody knew everybody, but nobody heard of these guys.
Well, wasn't that because, you could be arrested? A little hard to believe listening to those records like Hamtramck Mama or Highland Park Girl and some of these.
Yeah.
But those double meanings.
Yeah.
It seemed to me, wasn't Jack Brown, he was arrested at one time.
He was, yes. It was in the newspaper.
Right. For selling these they were called party records.
Right, yeah. But that's true. But I don't know. By the 50s, these kinds of records were doing okay in the jukeboxes. He was selling a lot of them, apparently, like The Tattooed Lady by Skeets McDonald and The Dirty Boogie by Roy Hall and his Cohutta Mountain Boys. But these guys put their names on the records. How come nobody knew who the Shawn Brothers were? And it wasn't that bad of a song. It was just, I'm a handyman to hand around. I'll wash your clothes. I'll cook. Set your fire. Don't worry about me because I don't get tired. That's about as
that's the most dirtiest it got.
That's about as hokum as it got.
Yeah.
So anyway, I knew that I was looking online for some kind of evidence, and I've been kind of casually looking around for 20 years or so, trying to figure this out. And I found these guys performing the song, these young guys in Chicago. They did it with the same instruments, and somebody in the comments section asked them, "Where did you get this song?" And they said, "The Shelton Brothers, Bob and Joe." And so I looked up the Shelton Brothers, who were huge, country music duo from the 30s. And sure enough, they recorded it for Decca Records. They had a hit with The Flip Side, which was Kusiku in 1941. So now I'm thinking, what is going on? Mm-hmm. Jack Brown, who his background wasn't country music, he started his label to push the pop songs that his wife wrote. But he eventually got into selling country music because of these jukebox hits he was having. but I could not figure out, why he would put out a record, a bootleg record of a 1941 song in 1951, 10 years later. So then I got into Ancestry.com, and I decided to see if there were any people by the name of Shawn living in town during that time. And I found the 1940 census, and there was a guy who stated that he was a musician, and he lived at the same address as Universal Recording Studios that put out Hamtramck Mama. So then the rabbit hole kind of opened up, and I just dove right in.
That's cool. Wow.
How did you get interested in this? When I'm assuming when you're younger, you got started into liking music, but
yeah.
How did you end up going backwards in time, to the really early stuff?
When I was in college and started doing radio, there was this show called the Rockabilly Show at WCBN, and I had kind of been into that and punk when I was in high school, but then I was listening to the show, and it was really great because it was all this other stuff that you'd never hear. And so I really got interested in the older rockabilly music, and eventually I took over the show and did that for several years. But I was always looking for new records to play on the show, and people to interview. The people who I would meet, some of them I'd get friendly with, and they'd start showing me some chords on guitar, and I'd start learning to play the way they played. One guy was Eddie Jackson, and he led bands in Detroit through the 70s. He retired, but then he would come back and sit in with his friends and stuff. And he showed me how to play with bar chords, the Western swing style. So so I could learn to love old country music at the same, from the same era, and then going backwards because Eddie grew up with Western swing, and then I met a bunch of people my age who were playing rockabilly music, but were also getting into Western swing, and then besides that, I took an interest in local history because I was interviewing all these people, so I was really interested in finding out more about the Detroit scene and what records were made here and what the stories were. So in about 1997, 98, I was hanging out with this guy who had a record shop on 8 Mile Road named Cappy, and he pulled out this box of mellow 78s and of the York Brothers, and he started playing. He said, "You should put out an album or something, or play these records on your show," and because nobody had ever reissued them ever. So I took them home and listened to them, and I was like, "When were these made?" And I asked him, "When were these made?" Because some of them sounded like 1940 era country, but some of them sounded like the rockabilly sound, the two guitars and bass sound that like Johnny Cash started out with, and Elvis Presley over at Sun Records, and a few other people actually. So like back in the mid 50s, but these 78s were not done then because by then the York Brothers were recording for King Records, and they actually cut like 66 sides for that label.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it was always a mystery that whole scene with the Universal hot wax, and then there were addresses that were sort of on the same addresses were appearing on the different labels, and so I had to sort of untangle all that.
Did that Universal Records become anything of what Universal is now, or
no relation?
Completely in before. I mean, it's the earliest Universal Records, obviously, but incredible. Huh.
Yeah. That company was, I believe it was based in Chicago,
okay,
and that got big after the war. But the Universal Recording Studios in Detroit on the Lower East Side, which is now known as the Jefferson-Chalmers District, which is completely different nowadays. The only building that's left standing there from that era, from that shopping area, is the old Hotel Savarang, that it's just a shell of a building right now. But anyway, it was in a storefront on the south side, and there were all kinds of buildings along both sides of East Jefferson. In 1939, and their first record was actually a polka record by a group called the Heidelberg Eight. They're a German dance band, and it's a very good record actually for what it is. I've heard it, and then like 2 records later, the York Brothers' Hamtramck Mama was issued, and that was sort of, according to an article I found in Billboard the following year, that was produced by the Marquette Music Company. There was a guy named Harry Graham who had worked there for 10 years. He was also the local Wurlitzer jukebox salesman for the state of Michigan region. And he was the manager of this company that had been in the vending business, coin machine business, for 40 years at that point. They were the largest company of such, of that kind of business in Michigan. And he put up the money to have these 2 unknown guys called George and Les York, the York brothers, to record a couple of numbers. And he put in an order for like 2,000 or something like that, and it sold out within weeks.
Wow.
And the idea was to sell to jukebox distributors because he had all the connections, you know. He set up a little company within or underneath the Marquette umbrella called Wolverine Music, and that was going to distribute records to jukebox operators. They would come to him and buy the records. So he had this great idea, or somebody gave him the idea, I don't know what, to create his own records and sell them.
How do you, what do you think enabled Detroit to kind of be, I don't want to call it maybe the center, but certainly a very important part of the whole country to rockabilly movement? Why Detroit?
You know, I don't think it got, that sort of music got really popular until Elvis came along and made it popular, but it was here. And it's, you know, the evidence is in these records that the York brothers did in 1939 to 42.
Right. It was popular enough that it, well, like Hamtramck Mama supposedly sold 300,000 copies.
Okay, that might have been
a slight exaggeration.
but still, I mean, in my book, I reproduced like 6 different versions just from those few years.
I know that Jack and Devorah Brown put out a version of it too. I don't know. Did they bootleg one of the originals, or did they have the York brothers re-record it? That
kind of goes along with that first story I was telling about tracking down this guy named Shaun. I'm pretty sure that Jack Brown got a hold of these masters from him around 1949 when he reissued the 1939 Hamtramck Mama. And then he also reissued another record that appeared on Universal by the York Brothers called Conscription Blues, but it was on a custom pressing, and it's really hard to find these days. It's on a label called Rialto. They were only on one side of the record. Huh. But he waited until Ed Kiley, the other guy involved with this, died, till after he died before he reissued more. So I think there might have been a falling out between Kiley and Shaun, who were in cahoots during that period when all these records were made. It's really...
Yeah, and then Jack Brown has success with Hamtramck Mama, and then you start seeing Fortune putting out more country kind of sides too, you know, because they're selling.
Yeah, and I think that Brown probably talked to Shaun about it, you know, and Shaun probably said, well, this is what we did, and, you know, you should try it, or something, you know, because he was doing the same thing they were doing. Brown was releasing records by local country artists, unknowns, and having hits with them.
In fact, he had the first hit with Skeeter Davis.
Yeah, Jealous. Well,
Jealous Love.
Jealous
Right,
Love.
with the Davis sisters, but
Brother Davis sisters. Yeah. But to get back to your question about how popular the music was, I mean, there were hundreds of thousands. Some say 200,000 people, white Southern people working in Detroit.
yeah, coming up to work in the auto industry.
In 1950. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of the bars
Right. Yeah.
in your book.
Yeah. I in fact I did a Google map of it. It's called the Car City Country Google Map, and I pinpointed the locations of all these bars that that interviewers told us about, or saw the addresses in the old newspapers and magazines.
And these were all places where this music was being played then.
Yeah, mainly country music, but of course, during the Rockabilly era, they played some of that, and they kind of mixed it all up. There were groups that would play bluegrass and carry an electric guitar. So they were versatile that way.
Well, do you have a lot of those original records in your own personal collection, or is this something you just talk about and do the research on?
I do have a lot. There's a discography in the back of my new book, and I have more than half. But I'm still working on it.
Cool. That's awesome. You're amongst collectors here, so that's wonderful.
Now you're playing this music yourself too, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I have. I haven't done anything since the pandemic began, but I was playing a little bit around town. When I was younger, I was in a couple of bands, and I did wound up making 3 CDs and 2 EPs. The first one was with a group called the Big Barn Combo, and we won a Detroit Music Award for our album. It was called "Coming All the Way from Detroit City."
Cool. Were they all originals, or did you do some covers?
I think we did two covers, 2 remakes on it, and I wrote the rest.
Wow,
very cool.
Yeah.
Well, what year was that?
Let's see. It came out in 2000.
Okay. Nice. So where do you play when you do go out?
Back then we did a lot of shows because for some reason people thought we fit in with the swing thing, swing trend that was going on in the 90s. But we played a lot of festivals. There was one in Indiana every year. There's one in Las Vegas. It's been going for 20 years, more than 20 years. And then we were invited to go over to Europe. We played across Germany and up into Scandinavia. We were pretty active up through the mid 2000s, and then things kind of got a little quiet as I settled down with family and that kind of thing. So.
And were you still doing your radio show through that, or?
No, I stopped doing radio in 2002.
Okay.
I think. But it was. But I started in '91, so it was like 10 years.
That's a good run. Yeah. Right.
At 4 different stations.
Wow. Do you still do? Have you been on a podcast before, or do you still do all the other stuff? Or
no, I haven't.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
So your new book is basically a good update since what's happened since you've been out of that part of the audio scene, I guess. Yeah,
I guess so. Yeah, it's
cool.
It's the latest project that I've accomplished.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I read somewhere, Craig, that you were influenced somewhat by Eddie Cochran. Did I get that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I love Eddie Cochran's music. He was important to me when I was in high school.
Well, how did you get into him? Because what year were you in high school?
Late 80s.
Okay, so Eddie Cochran had been dead for almost 30 years at
25
that point.
years,
yeah. So how did you get into Eddie Cochran? Where did you hear him?
Well, I think part of it was the punk rock scene.
Okay.
I think who was it? Sid Vicious, who did something else or something like that.
Okay.
So my friends all dug that music, so I dug it too. But then I was into the Cramps, and they remade a lot of really obscure stuff too. And then my parents had records.
Okay.
And they were big into early rock and roll, and there was this radio show on in Detroit every Sunday called Old and Gold, and that was always on the stereo every Sunday. We'd be eating dinner and listening to it, and eventually, I'd start naming groups before my dad could. We had a little competition there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I brought that up because I was a big Eddie Carpenter fan.
Oh,
and I had the original 45s.
Nice, yeah.
So, I was just, it was tragic when he was killed. I mean, big loss there, just like when Buddy Holly died. I'm a big fan of those guys. And early rockabilly, Elvis, of course. And, that was always interesting when somebody younger gets back into music that I was so into, when I was a young guy.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys keeping the torch lit long enough for me to, to feel the heat.
Yeah, there we are. Are you familiar with the Michigan box?
Yes.
Okay.
I have it. Yeah.
Right. What do you think of that?
I don't know. I mean, it just blew me away.
Yeah. I mean,
with all the music that they tracked down. But I do know one guy pretty well who was working on it. He's one of the people working on it. And then the guy who put it out sent it to me because he thought I helped. He thought I helped it. Well, what they did was they stole pictures off of my website. But anyway,
Gary has that issue.
Yeah, they. So these were Michigan guys who put this together.
I know of one guy, and then I think he tapped a few other local collectors for certain records, but yeah, it was a group effort, and then the guy with the money was over in Germany to put it out.
Yeah, that was a fascinating collection.
Yeah.
How many CDs?
10.
Yeah, there were 10 CDs.
10 CD box set. Wow.
And it's not everything. There are artists in there. They just chose 3 or 4 tracks, and that was it. So I mean, it's just crazy.
Is it the usual stuff you would hear, like Bob Seger?
No, not at all.
Oh,
It was mostly people you would not have heard of.
Yeah, most of it was the 50s and early 60s.
really?
Yeah.
Pre-Beatles then. Okay. Elvis era.
Yeah, this is all pre.
Well, you said Lafayette's on it, right?
Yeah, but that's it was a recording from 1958. And most of the recordings are not much later than 61 or 62, and most of them are 50s. There's a lot of Fortune stuff, but a lot of really small little labels I'd never heard of, independent labels in Detroit, and some really classics. I always loved that cut "I'm Gone" by Vic Gallen that has Dennis Coffey on it. His first record.
Really?
Oh man,
He was 15.
yeah.
No way.
And it is really a good rockabilly tune. Also, it's
I'll have to
great.
check that out. That's cool. Dennis is awesome.
Yeah, and it's just like the guy, this Vic Gallen, put it out on his own gondola label or something like that, and probably hardly any copies of it. I'm sure they're really pretty expensive. You could find original of that 45. Do you have that one in your collection?
I do not. No.
Did you ever have a record companies coming to you for any of whether it be your writing or your archives?
Nope. I haven't been really, putting myself out there too much.
Okay. Third Man Out of Detroit seems to be hitting all the collectors that, with the details. I mean, they even came to Fred for something. But then again, Fred managed blues artists too. But I'm just curious because you seem to have the knowledge in the background of a lot of stuff that probably people are searching for. So
You put out at least 2 albums that I know of, that I have.
Oh, the Eddie
York
Jackson.
Brothers and
York
Eddie
Brothers.
Jackson.
Yeah. Right. And that York Brothers album was a compilation of of music from this Universal Hot Wax Mellow company.
How did you take that off the original 78s or?
Yeah. Cappy loaned me a box. I took it home and recorded them, and then figured out which tracks to put on an LP. I pressed a vinyl LP because that's all I cared about at the time, you know. And
In color vinyl.
Everyone was begging for CDs, and I said no.
Awesome.
But yeah.
So those 78s must have been in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Cappy's got an amazing collection himself. I mean, he's been collecting since, well, he grew up in this neighborhood where these records were made. And when he was a teenager, he had a newspaper route, and he would go over to the Mellow Music Shop, which at that time had different owners. And he told me that he set up a subscription for Sun Records. He said, anything these guys put out, I want. So whenever you get something in, let me know.
Well, that's got to be quite a kick for him that this music is, kind of regained popularity to a certain extent.
Yeah, I don't know how popular it is.
Well, but there's still interest in it. Obviously it's not going to sell in the millions or anything, but
right.
But there is interest in it, and that's cool.
Yeah, and this new book kind of, I mean, before I was able to piece this together up until this year and get the stories out, nobody really knew or understood how it all worked together, and I mean, I talked to relatives of this Shaun guy. I talked to relatives of Kylie. Nobody had any idea.
Jeez.
They couldn't tell me. They couldn't even. Yeah, it was just really interesting. Even the York brothers' relatives couldn't really tell me too much about their time during this period. I had to look at a lot of magazines and newspapers and that sort of thing.
Well, their family probably, I don't know, they came, I'm trying to think, when the York brothers from West Virginia or Tennessee
East
or something.
Kentucky, yeah.
And so maybe their family was still back home, that didn't come to Detroit with them.
Actually, a few of them did come up to Detroit. In fact, I ran into, it's really strange when I think about it, but the coincidence is really strange. A guy I knew in high school, he was a grade ahead of me, got in touch a few years ago after the first book came out, because there's a chapter in there about the York brothers. And he was related. His grandmother was a sister of theirs.
Wow.
So yeah, their family, their father had 10 kids with, I think, 2 or 3 different wives. So there are a lot of Yorks out there, and there were quite a few in Detroit. But yeah, and then there was the religious side of the family that didn't allow them to hear, what these guys put on records.
Wow.
So like playing on the honky tonks and
right,
recording party records. Oh
yeah,
gosh,
yeah.
It was scandalous.
They frowned on dancing. Yeah. They told me they frowned on dancing, and they were in their own bubble. But anyway, the York brothers did an amazing thing. I mean, they recorded at least 35 sides that people have dug up over the years. I was able to get my hands on some one-sided records of mellow recordings that I have no idea what the purpose was. It could be promotional, because jukeboxes at that time played one side of a record. But I have no idea. They have white labels. Somebody wrote in pencil the titles, and then some of these were never released on 2-sided records.
Wow.
So there's still more to keep an eye out for.
Now, you probably have a lot easier to trace the York Brothers once they got on King Records, though.
Yeah,
I guess that's more of a national.
Yeah, but you
label.
know, I discovered during the research for this book that even back then in the early '40s, they were getting their songs published in song folios and in magazines. So I somehow I think it was an auction lot there. I found like 6 books, Songs of the Prairies, you know, volume 1 through 6, and then the York Brothers had their own song folio, and a lot of the songs had like mellow and then the catalog number at the top, right under the headline of the title of the song. So I was able to track, you know, all these songs that they wrote, and some of those were actually on those unreleased one-sided records. So they were pretty ambitious. You know, in after Hamtramck Mama, and then they followed it up with a few more records. They signed with Decca Records in '41 and recorded 6 sides for them. So they were on a major label, and they stopped recording for these guys in Detroit for a while. They went down to Portsmouth, Ohio, where they had actually gotten their start on radio down there, and became full-time musicians. They performed at night and around the region and on radio. But in '42, they came back up to Detroit. I guess they'd played out the region, and started making more records. And while they were gone, Ed Kiley tried to get other have more success with other local artists, and he recorded a few other country artists who were up here, including this all-woman combo called Evelyn Hare and her Swingtime Cowgirls. They played Western Swing. It was a quartet, and they were the first all-woman group to be on records playing Western Swing.
Wow.
I talked to several people that I know who are experts in that history. They couldn't think of anyone that did that before.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool to
What
find.
year would that be?
41.
41.
That's in your first book, right?
Yeah, I mentioned them in there. Yeah,
Right.
I didn't have the whole story though. You know, Evelyn Hare died in 2018, and until her obituary, I never was able to track her down. So frustrating. But
Yeah.
but after the York Brothers returned to Detroit, Mello just put out records by them, and none of it was any kind of bawdy, salacious songs. They were all songs that Decca Records would have appreciated. You know, they could have been played on radio.
They changed their formatting then, or their style. Yeah.
Yeah, and they put out like 17 records. In 1942, we've got materials shortages because of the war. I mean, the government shut off the shellac pipeline by the end of '42, and most factories were retooled for the war effort. So where were these records being made?
Well, maybe they made them all knowing that the shutoff was coming.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and then released them afterward. Yeah,
Yeah,
possibly.
could be.
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be an interesting story in its own right. You know, to find out, you know, if that was kind of a strategy. You know.
Yeah. I've been asked if I had found any evidence of a local company that was pressing records at the time, and I couldn't. The earliest I could find was something in '46 called Melmore Inc., but that's as early back as I could find it. But you know, the company, the Safeway Industries that did the Vogue picture discs, they were working on that in '45. I think they announced that they were going to be doing it in '45, so they must have had some kind of knowledge or machinery to figure out how they were going to make them. Mm-hmm. They had some knowledge of the process, and that's another thing that blew my mind. The fact that this transcription company was operating in 1939, doing all this independent work in Detroit, and this guy Shaun, his background wasn't wasn't in engineering or electronics. It was he drove a cab after returning from the French battlefields in 1917. So he was in the army, but I think there might be a connection there with United Sound Systems, because Jim Syracuse, who invented or created that United Sound, was from what other acquaintances have said in interviews, he was machining his own stuff in order to make records in Detroit in the 30s. So and Ed Wolfram, one of his engineers in the 60s, said that early on he was very supportive of anybody who took an interest in that kind of business. So he could have actually set up Universal Recording Studios, and Shaun could have kind of taken over. Who knows?
What's your favorite rabbit hole story of all the stuff that you dug up? I mean, what one is the one that pleases you the most for all the work you put in?
I'm just I'm really happy that I was able to piece the whole thing together. But one thing that I was pretty excited about was, there were all these early productions of music done in Detroit by Detroit artists, and one of the things that they did with the Universal label, since they were still a custom order type of place, you could go in and cut a record or bring a recording and have them make records for you, was the Bethany Chorus of the Ebenezer AME Church, which is like, I don't know if it's the earliest, because I'm not an expert on the music, but it's one of the earliest African American recordings of religious music in town. And I asked around a couple of people I know who have a better knowledge. They couldn't tell me if there were any earlier records of that type of music, but that was pretty cool.
Interesting.
Craig, I have to ask you, since we're by Saginaw, you wrote about 1947 when little Jimmy Dickens came to WKNX. Mm-hmm. So how did you find a lot of that information? Because I'm using, as you know, parts of your thing for my next book.
Oh, are you?
Well, okay. We talk about
Be my guest.
No, I mean just quotes from it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Other people have done that too. That's fine with me. I was a co-author. I did the writing for the book, the Detroit Country Music book. But Keith Cady helped with a lot of interviews. Okay. And research. So he and I collaborated on the research and the interviews. He was working at WSTS Radio in Canton, near Ypsilanti, I guess. At the time, we were working on this around 2000 or so, and he had access to WSM. So he had contacts down there who would put him in touch with people, and he got a couple of interviews with Jimmy Dickens. So Jimmy told his side of the story about coming up to Saginaw and living up here, and how things were, and the band and everything. He also Keith also got a hold of Casey Clark's wife, so we sat down with her, and she talked with us for hours. And so she told us all about that too, that experience.
Because a lot of those bands went to Detroit, and then went on some to the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah. I don't know much about the groups that were at WKNX after Casey left. Okay. But there was Tex Ferguson. I know a little bit about him.
Well, that's what I'm writing about.
Yeah. Okay.
More of that.
And then there was another guy named Bob Schaefer and his Saddle Pals. He was in the pages of Country Song Roundup But
Frank Zoltan.
Who?
Frank Zoltan.
Oh yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and there were other people. There was the guy with the boy with the golden voice, Eugene.
Right. He was really
Eugene
interesting.
Starr. Yeah.
He had the Elvis haircut.
Yeah. He was very popular according to his to people who knew him. And Keith talked to one of his brothers.
Okay.
So he got some good stories from him there. And we got some photos of him with Jimmy Dickens and Casey Clark on the stage all together. And then there was a guy named Chuck Hatfield who also played up here. He was with Tex Ferguson for a while.
Did you get toured together? I have a poster. Well, I found it online. Playing from around at Owasso or somewhere, high school.
Yeah.
And Casey Clark, little Jimmy Dickens. Yep. And a number of others.
Yeah, May Hawks got started. She moved up here from Tennessee, and some friends of hers and her husband said, "Hey, let's go see this band up in Bad Axe." So
that's it, Bad Axe.
And she went up there and saw Jimmy Dickens and Casey Clark, and when they found out she could sing, they brought her up on stage. She said, and after that, she lived in Troy, and got on WJR, had her own radio shows, and was on the Big Barn Frolic Jamboree.
Did you get to talk to Bob Dyer at all from WKNX?
No.
He was, he would have been a real wealth of information for you. Because he was, I know he was there when little Jimmy Dickens was.
Well, right after that, but, maybe more of Casey Clark and Tex Ferguson. Mm-hmm. But then the whole rest of the way he was there.
Yeah.
I think he owned it at one time when it was actually moved to Frankenmuth.
WKNX? Wow.
What's the current Detroit country music scene like?
Well, it kind of moved out to the suburbs, by the 70s and 80s. With people moving to the suburbs, it kind of moved with them, but it was still pretty active. I mean, there were a lot of popular bars on 8 Mile in the 70s.
But like now?
But now...
I know there's a huge place right along 94.
Oh, yeah.
Out of Belleville.
Belleville, yeah. Yeah, and then there's Club Canton, which is the oldest operating honky-tonk in the area. Yeah.
And traditional country?
They do have acts in there that play that, but they have a variety of things. But the owners were really great. They were they were very supportive about the Detroit Country Music Book. They let us come in there and have a jamboree one Sunday.
Are you familiar with Zachariah Malachy and the Executive Hillbillies?
I've heard the name. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, there are some groups, but
and they're like traditional country.
Yeah. There are some groups. Trying to think. Eric Holkbor out of Ann Arbor, and of course that guy. What's his name? Dave Dupree. He's from. I think he's from downriver. And there's also the Kentuckians of Michigan, which is a social club in Romulus. They have groups playing there. It used to be really cool. Like 20 years ago, there would be bluegrass every Friday night and a potluck. But now they kind of mix it up. There aren't as many bluegrass bands, I guess, that they can pull in. Not touring as much anymore or something. So they have some old country throwback bands and that sort of thing there. Eagles Club in Taylor used to have bluegrass acts there all the time too.
So you were mentioning earlier some of the background that you like too is from punk through the Cramps or Name some other bands that you turned that would be like, I was thinking, I remember the Cramps in the 80s, Jason the Scorchers in the 90s.
Oh yeah, the Paladins and
Southern Culture on the Skids came out of that.
Yeah. I wasn't crazy about the Stray Cats. I thought they looked too weird.
Reverend Horton Heat.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you still grab onto as like that's more your era, more your age or whatever, or do you still just have a love for the old stuff?
I still keep in touch with friends who are still playing. There was a rockabilly trio called High Noon that I got to know pretty well in the 90s, and their bassist is now working with Willie Nelson, and
wow.
So people have evolved. There's like Dave Alvin is still hitting the road these days.
Amazing. Yeah. And producing still.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's cool. Are you working on any new material, or where's your head at with the music right now?
No, it's just I moved into a house a couple years ago, so I've been renovating.
Yeah, living. Yeah.
But this this book, the new book, is my has been my project for the past few years.
2 years to put it together? 3?
A couple years, yeah. Actually, I got started on it shortly after we moved into our house. So, and like I said, I'm just renovating almost everything.
Right on.
You have a website that
I was just going to ask if where people can go. Obviously Amazon for everybody.
Lots of great stories.
Tell us what your website.
Yeah, the website is carcitycountry.com. It's a blog, and when I put together the Detroit Country Music book and submitted it to U of M Press, they said, "This is great, we'll take it, but we want you to cut it in half."
Oh.
So right now it's 150,000 words what they published, and I had a 300,000 word manuscript. So I said, "What am I going to do with all this stuff?" So I put it out on most of it is out on the website. It's not everything. I still have stuff in the can that sort of trickles out from time to time. But there's some discographies on there. There are some interview transcriptions. There are some actual, things that were chapters in the book that got pulled, pictures and that sort of thing. One great thing about the website is that I hear from people that I never expect to hear from, relatives of musicians whose pictures appear on the website. And maybe they haven't heard about the book before, but they Google somebody's name and they find the site. And then they send in an inquiry or an email and say, "Hey, I'm related to so-and-so." And,
wow.
And then I get the story, So I'm
That's
still
rewarding.
Yeah, I'm still researching and still learning new things.
You using social media as well?
Yeah.
So you can be found on Facebook and Instagram or any of that?
Yeah, the Detroit Country Music Book has a Facebook page. And, I do Instagram at Bones Maki.
Are you, did you, through your radio years as well as your writing years, did you ever pair up with someone else that's similar to what you've done and maybe writing books about some other kind of music or other musicians that you've kind of got to meet along the way in Michigan here?
When let's see,
Fred's obviously one of them.
Well, yeah, Fred, and then there were several guys, musicians, who collect records in town who were about my age. I think they were a little older when I got started. So yeah, I've known them for many, many years, and we swapped records and told stories and stuff. So that's been really cool. The Detroit area community that I've grown up with is really great. In when was it? 2002, there was a big show in Southfield where my wife and I had our first house, and it was put on by Geno Washington, and it had brought back all these old guys who recorded at Fortune.
Wow.
And other small labels in Detroit. And my wife had lived in New Orleans, so she knew this guy, Michael Hart. And he's a writer and a musician too, and collects records like crazy. And so he came up for that show, and I think that's when I first met him. And then we went down to the Ponderosa Stomp a year or two later and met him down there again and hung out with him. And it's an amazing show. Geno Washington was there, Nathaniel Mayer. They tried to get Jack Earls that year, but he couldn't make it. And then when Katrina hit, Michael actually moved up to Detroit, and in no time he was in all the corners of old Detroit music, finding out everything he could about everything.
Fantastic.
And so he's one of the guys who co-authored the Fortune book that came out last year.
We've been talking about that. That's an incredible book.
Yeah. It is. It's so dense. I can't tell you that I've read it from front to back. You know,
I'm about halfway through it.
I read something here and there, but I haven't had time to really just plow through it.
That's cool. That's a massive book. I've been looking at the prices on eBay for those, and whoa.
Yeah, it's expensive, but it's great. I mean, they did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Where can one get your books? Would you go to your page, or can you buy them on Amazon? Or?
Yeah, I did post something on my Car City Country website, but you can go to Amazon all over the world. If you're in Europe, you can go to European Amazon and get it.
Wow.
And you can go to this great independent bookstore called The Book Beat in Oak Park, Michigan, which has signed copies for sale.
Oh, no.
Very cool.
And so you can get it online. Just about anywhere. Barnes & Noble has it. Actually, The Book Beat sells their signed copies online too. So it's available. It's out there.
All right, great.
What's your future in your future here? What's coming up after the renovations?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably get going with some more music. Playing music. I don't pick up the guitar as much as I'd like, and then of course I'll be adding stuff to the website. This latest book, it just came out of the blue. Really, I mean. Once I got going on it, I realized, I need to make something tangible out of this.
Is that published by University of Michigan also?
No, I published it under Waxhound Press.
Okay.
But it has, I couldn't get good pictures of some of the people in it, so I drew them myself. I illustrated some of this, and then it has label scans in it, and information and quotes from interviews that Keith and I did for the previous book, and a discography that you won't find anywhere else.
Well, thank you so much for coming on our show and giving us all this information. This is totally perfect outlet for everything you've done and everything you continue to do. And thanks for spending some time with us.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation.
When your next one comes around and you get music going, will you come back?
Sure.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Do you have a favorite party record?
Oh, man. I really like Detroit Hulu Girl.
Oh, okay.
But because it's got that crazy steel guitar in it that just goes nuts. But the flip side of that, Highland Park Girl is a song that I memorized and I have performed in public. So
yeah, that's quite a tale there.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite.
Okay.
Did you ever talk to Rich Topeka, another author?
Yeah.
Rich has got his own podcast too. He's tuned in with us for an episode that we've had going on that we tracked down somebody he's been looking for his books, and he's out in LA now.
Oh, really?
And I got him hooked up with the guy that we interviewed, and he's from around here. And I thought of Rich immediately when I heard what you were talking about. I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are running in similar circles. So
yeah, we've communicated through social media.
Okay.
I've never met him in person, unfortunately. But
He's from around this area as well. So him and I flew through the same English and journalist backgrounds around here. So
cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Craig Maki.
Oh, thank you.
We hope to see you down the road.
All right. I'll be back.
Yeah, thanks, Craig.
The MMHP is hosted on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and our own Libsyn podcast site. You can also search MMHP989 on Facebook for up-to-the-minute information, as well as both Dr. J and Sir Fred's album picks of the week, posted every weekend. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com. Brought to you by Michigan Rock and Roll Legends, located both inside the Bay County Historical Museum on Washington Avenue, as well as Scotty's Sandbar on Evergreen Drive at the Bay City Middle Grounds.
On behalf of the hosts, Gary, Dr. J. Johnson, Sir Fred Rife, archivist and videographer Mike Beatty, and myself, this podcast wouldn't be here without Studio 163's Alan Garcia, the voice of MMHP, Mr. Eddie Switek, all of our guests, and you, the listeners.
You've been listening to the MMHP and the 989. From all of us at the podcast, we want to thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even get into the backgrounds behind Kylie and Shout. I mean, Kylie was in jail, in and out of jail the first half of his life.
There's our dirt.
You know, in 1951, here in Saginaw, well, not here, but next door in Saginaw, I acquired all these wire recordings a couple years ago, and one of them was 1951, a 14 and under talent contest at the Michigan Theater, sponsored by Roy Rogers / Sears. The winners, I have every act. This is 1951. Yeah. The winners, now I don't know if it's any relative, but we're the York brothers.
What? They were
14 and under, and they were doing, their winning number was a Hank Williams. So in 1951, when did he die? 51, right? Or 52? Or...
Oh, right, yeah, right.
So he was probably, very popular at the time.
Yeah, no, was it New Year's Eve?
Yeah.
1951?
Right, okay.
Oh my gosh, that's really ironic.
What year, what month was it in? December?
What, this?
The contest.
I'll have to look it up. I can't remember now. It was in the summer.
Oh, okay.
Early fall.
So it was before Hank died.
Right.
Yeah, he was very popular. Eddie Jackson.
But the York brothers, I always kept meaning to ask you about that,
I have no idea, no idea. I mean, they were living here. They were in Detroit at the time.
The same with Samson Pittman, a black blues guy who Alan Lomax came up and recorded him, and I can't remember the other guy right now. But I couldn't find anything about Samson Pittman. Finally, I looked up, or something came up, find a grave.
Oh, yeah.
Here he is in Saginaw.
No kidding.
Graveyard. I'm going, what the hell?
Wow.
So I went to the cemetery because my grandfather happened to be in that same cemetery, but completely different location in it. And I could never find it. Oh. It's in the area that's like old.
Do they have an office? You can always ask. They have maps.
Yeah, I didn't go that far. I just thought, I'm going to stop here on the way to Saginaw when I was living in Ann Arbor. But anyways, his family, his kids, had a band here, a blues band. There were 2 blues bands, and one of them was the Pittman Family Blues Band.
Wow.
So I got a hold of Samson Pittman Jr., and he wouldn't give me the time of the day.
Really?
He goes, what's in it for me?
Oh, jeez.
And I went, wow. what's in it for you? You know, tell your grandchildren, you know, this is about your grandpa. He wouldn't give me, he hung up on me, actually.
Wow.
You have to put it on a podcast so he can listen to it and say, oh, that's what he was talking about.
Yeah. So the
Unfortunately.
history ends right there, you know.
Yeah.
Somehow he ended up in a Saginaw graveyard.
And I really love that stuff that early.
So did you ever get to see Eddie Cochran?
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
No, I did not. But I did get to see Jack Scott in his glory.
In his prime?
In his prime.
Nice.
Oh.
1959 on the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars tour. At that time, I didn't even know that Jack Scott had any Detroit connection. You know, I was only, I don't know, 12 years old or something like that when I saw it.
Yeah, your book, you know, I had no idea about the whole Saginaw connection and where it went, you know.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting that they opened the place. I mean, Jimmy Dickens said that when he got up here, Casey Clark was painting the walls of the studio.
Okay. Because since then, I found a lot more information, you know.
Cool.
The whole time, Frank Zoltan's daughter was a girlfriend of mine a long time ago now. But her father was a country musician. And it just didn't do anything to me. And now, after all these years, I wish I'd have known him.
Yeah, I know what you mean, man. When we were researching that Detroit country music book, I was kind of, you know, making interviews, doing interviews just to get the stories and maybe put them on the radio. I wasn't, you know, really serious like we got. But we went to Swanee Caldwell's funeral. And we're hearing all kinds of great stories. And Keith said to me, oh, "Can't believe it. You know, missed our opportunity to talk to Swanee, you know, because we jammed with him. I had jammed with him several times, hung out with him and stuff. Never asked him about his past, you know, and then people were just, you know, like flies as we got closer to
That's why it's all got
publication.
to be preserved, I know.
So most of them didn't even get to see the book when it came out. But